Man, just let me know what you need.
All right, you mind if we start with the Bernie Lomax, Chris Adams cases?
Sure. All right.
Yeah, let me
Ask
let me
away,
get
Dan.
my notes out here real quick. Yeah, Discord. So one thing I wanted to see is so let's start with the Chris Adams case. I've got the largest amount of gaps in that particular case. I'd like to start with the incident that happened on July 6th. This is in reference to Mr. Adams allegedly backing over and threatening one Quinn Wild. And then this is related to an incident on the Bernie Lomax case of that you witnessed. So maybe can we start with exactly where this crime scene is, and what can you tell me about what you observed as you responded?
Okay. So this actually occurred out on Innocence, a little bit to the west of the 24/7 store that was there. There's an intersection. I believe that's going to be. I believe that's the Power Street intersection. It happened right there on the sidewalk. Essentially, Miss Wild was riding her bike, and Mr. Adams was in his vehicle, which was stolen. From what I can remember, the the first occurrence was when Mr. Adams attempted to strike Miss Wild off of her bike. Essentially, he was trying to get her off the bike so that he could talk with her. He was trying to get information on individuals who had shot at him at a prior incident out at the Vespucci parking garage. Only when he did hit her, he did actually go over her and run her over. Like the vehicle actually went over her. Once he did that, he stepped out of the vehicle, produced a knife, and was standing over Miss Wild, threatening her with said knife, trying to get this information out. Once she basically gave it to him that she wasn't going to say anything, he started to walk back towards his vehicle. And then while he was walking back towards his vehicle, another vehicle appeared on scene, which was a Buccaneer. Now, this Buccaneer had parked right alongside this scene, and when Mr. Adams actually was in his vehicle, the stolen vehicle, the person inside had already started to engage him in gunfire. Now, that's when I started to roll up on scene, where I saw the said vehicle. The vehicle came back to Mr. Lomax, and the individual that had produced that firearm actually, I saw it myself, which ended up being Mr. Lomax. I was able to tell this by just the attire he was wearing as well as his facial features.
All right, and this was that gray in color Albany Buccaneer. All right, and that's
sir.
like a kind of an old time muscle car, right? If I recall correctly.
Two-door black top. Yep, muscle car.
All right, and did you witness the number of shots that were fired? Did you what did you hear as you rolled up onto the scene?
So I audibly heard the shots. It didn't sound. It sounded, if I remember correctly, about 5 to 6 shots. It didn't sound like the entire neighborhood had shot off, as Miss Wild had tried to mention. Because originally her statement was that. At the time, her statement was that Mr. Adams had been shot by some of the local gang-affiliated individuals down in the area. Now, Mr. Adams had a different story at the time, but he wasn't given as much about who actually did it.
Yeah, I saw.
So that's as far as.
I saw Miss Wild's statement. I understand that she is she may not cooperate. If we get into court situation, she kind of has this. It sounds like she's been making some tough choices in her life. 18 years old, several convictions for drug trafficking, possession, that kind of thing. Is align with your understanding of Miss Wild?
Yeah, she has a very combative attitude when it comes to the PD. I know a couple of my troopers have attempted to kind of start to get on her good side, tried to help her out, work her through a couple of things. I
Yeah,
believe
how
one
you
of them
doing,
was
Ann
actually
Kohler?
also working with her attorney at the time, which would be Leon Chert, to try and get her on some kind of, I guess, rehabilitation program or something like that. But I mean, she essentially, from what Parker, Trooper Parker, had told me, and this is one of my troopers who had been trying to work with her. He believed that a lot of these cases that she ended up coming under custody of us, he believed that it might have been some kind of cry for attention. Essentially, she was doing it to get our attention, not in a malicious way, but more so, I guess, for her own personal needs, if you know what I mean.
Right. It sounds like there's some. I interviewed Trooper Parker already, and he's advised me that there's some pretty complex history that he was aware of for her. He believes that maybe her parents or guardians were that she believes that they were possibly gunned down or wronged by police, and so she has this thing. You know, maybe it's kind of an attention-grabbing thing, but yeah, it's definitely complex from what I hear.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
I do hope I can speak with her, but it does sound like we have some contradicting statements. Obviously, you having witnessed this firsthand with Mr. Lomax, that seems to be obviously it's a pretty good fact there. What about are you aware of any relationship between Miss Wild and Mr. Lomax?
Me personally, I'm not. I mean, I've not seen them together at any function. If that's what you're asking, I'm not honestly too sure, because when we did interview Lomax, we did attempt to see what his ties to Miss Wild was. He didn't really give us much on that. And if you actually looked at if you look through the court report that Miss Novoa, Trooper Novoa wrote up, I believe on there should mention that Mr. Lomax actually confessed and took responsibility for that situation. He did admit that he was the individual that stepped out of the vehicle and shot at Mr. Adams.
Right, and we've got him at the scene. He's got an admission, on that. I'll ask Trooper Novoa if we managed to recover the firearm that he had at the time.
So we actually were able to recover a firearm. Now, this firearm, we're not sure if it's the same as used in that situation. But the firearm that we were able to recover, which is in our evidence locker, is going to be the firearm that was used at the Vespucci Bank, Elgin Ave, Vespucci Boulevard.
Yeah, I've got
shooting.
I think we got a pretty solid understanding of what happened there. We've got that weapon. We did some investigation around there. We found, even though it wasn't evident from Trooper Novoa's point of view, she couldn't see the shooter on camera, but I was able to work out exactly where the shooter was, and then where the shooter had fled to, and in cooperation with the bank, we've been able to pull the parking lot videotape, and we can see his movements, Mr. Lomax's movements. Of course, he confessed to this particular crime as well. And it looks like a pretty solid premeditated case, honestly.
Great.
The Adams case, though, is the Adams side of things is where I'm really trying to get a better understanding and see if we can gather some more evidence. I feel like we don't know the full story here yet. So were you aware in the past, or have you guys had any contact or issues between Mr. Adams and Mr. Lomax prior to the event on the 6th of July?
Was that going to be the shooting that we
That's
just
right. That's
spoke
right.
about?
We're still at that in the timeline, if you don't mind.
Um, Before that, to my knowledge, from what I can recall, I don't believe so. I know after that situation, there had been a bit of continued tension between the two, as dictated in
Right.
the report, eventually leading to the shooting that occurred up at Clinton, at Low Power as well, and then finally concluding at Elgin and Vespucci.
Roger. Okay. It just seems odd to me that Mr. Lomax would just, unless if he was he had a prior relationship with Miss Wilde, that he would just suddenly roll up on the scene and then gun down somebody he just doesn't know.
Okay. Well, one thing I will say to you, and this should be helpful to your investigation, I would speak more in regards to that to Miss Navoa, because she actually is more familiar with Mr. Lomax in regards to these situations than I am. He mainly spoke to her about that, and as you saw through the text messages that we have recorded for evidence, I mean he was making contact with her before and after the Adams shooting.
Right. So let's move on then in time here to July 7th as it relates to Mr. Chris Adams. So on July 7th at approximately 17:23 hours, you had noted that you observed a black in color Dinka Jester that you made a traffic stop on, and that was a vehicle that was registered to one of the locals here in town, not Mr. Adams. Mr. Adams was identified in the car. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So that traffic stop occurred out on not Elgin. That would be. Let me reference my map here. That's gonna be the one that occurred out in Alta and San Andreas. So essentially, I conducted a traffic stop on that vehicle. I approached said vehicle. Trooper Navoa was my secondary unit. When I approached the vehicle and Mr. Adams had rolled the window down, first off, I had a very strong odor coming out of that vehicle that was similar to marijuana. So that already gave me reason to want to try and get Mr. Adams out of the vehicle. Now, before I even tried to do that, I had requested his ID as well as any registration on the vehicle, which he did produce, and he actually handed me his ID before he fled from us from that traffic stop.
Okay. Do you have body cam footage of that particular stop?
I believe I should. I'd have to look at it. What was the date on that traffic stop? Could you?
July 7th, and at 17:23 hours is when you noted that you observed the black and colored Dinka Jester.
I should have body cam footage and dash cam footage as well. If you could do me a favor and shoot me an email just to remind me to try and look for that when I get off shift today, I can. If I do end up having cam footage of it, I'll send that over to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So then at this point in time, Mr. Adams begins fleeing the scene. You take I believe you take the primary in that. Were you the primary unit, and or was I'm sorry, Navoa I think was the primary unit, and you were the secondary. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. So Trooper Navoa was the primary unit in that pursuit. Essentially, when I conducted the traffic stop, we've had multiple run-ins with Mr. Adams when it comes to felonious evasions as well as being in stolen vehicles. So I had instructed Miss Navoa to stay in her vehicle in case he did take off on us. So she was the primary unit during the chase. She ended up chasing him throughout the city. The actual pursuit ended when Mr. Adams disabled the vehicle and actively fled on foot out on Vinewood Boulevard. Now, Navoa had been pursuing him on foot. They ended up going out to, I believe it was Didion Drive. There's a estate out there that has open access from
This
the
would be
street level.
the
When Novoa pursued him
is this
toward
the what is it, the is that the Gentry Manor Hotel?
what's that?
Is that what we're talking about there?
Yeah, I believe so. It's out on Didion Drive, so that would be the estate. So when they entered the estate, Mr. Adams had turned a corner going into like the pool
It's up
backyard
a flight
area.
of
As soon as
up a
Miss
flight of
Novoa,
stairs that kind of twists back on itself, and then goes to an upper level. Correct?
no, this is gonna be it's gonna be on the same level as the street. So when she turned that corner, I believe there was a bunch of hedgeways that kind of made a median between the rest of the estate and that area. So as she went into that area, Mr. Adams had already been there waiting, and he had actually produced a knife. And when she went in there, he attacked her and stabbed her to the point where she went down, and then he continued to flee. We weren't able to apprehend him after that.
All right. And at that point in time, so he was not apprehended, but in the police report, I have that Trooper Hotchkiss searched the area and did uncover a knife that we believe is used in the attack. It was that. Do you know if forensics has already been run on that knife for blood of Trooper?
No,
Novoa?
I don't believe they've gotten any. I don't believe they've gotten any results from it. But if I recall, Mr. Adams did mention that he did dump the knife out in that area.
Do you know when he mentioned this? Was it at what point in time he was interrogated about this particular incident?
This was out after the Clinton Avenue shooting, when we had both Mr. Lomax and Mr. Adams in our custody.
Okay.
We questioned him about that incident as well, because he had that warrant out for his arrest pertaining to the attempted murder of Novoa, as well as the felony evasion and all that other stuff.
Just out of curiosity, just for my own understanding, if he actively in a fleeing situation takes cover in a bush and then awaits the trooper, and then attempts to stab her, or does stab her, is that a premeditated action by the law, or is that I'm just curious.
So essentially, if there's any kind of premeditation in regards to an attempt on someone's life, if it shows that they had the will to perpetrate this, I mean, that would classify it. I mean, obviously, stabbing someone is something that can lead to death. So it would essentially be classified as an ambush, if in simpler terms, since he did wait for Novoa to go through that little corridor, and when she did go through, he then attacked her.
Okay, so I'll inquire with the labs about forensics for the blood on the knife. But that makes a lot of sense, and I understand she was treated by paramedic Thomas, and
yes, she was transported down to, I believe, Mount Zona Medical, and I mean, she's made a full recovery since then.
I do not believe. Let's see, you're not listed on the events of 7-8. This is in reference to the downtown shootings that occurred around the Pillbox, Upper and Lower Power Street area, kind of around the parking lot. Have you heard of this incident?
Yes, this actually came from statements gotten from both Mr. Adams and Lomax. Essentially, throughout the city, there had been multiple encounters where both individuals had produced firearms. A couple threats were made. A couple shots did ring out.
Oh no!
The event that occurred down at the lower pillbox area, right next to the Vespucci parking garage, I don't believe anyone was actually struck, as both individuals still remained at large after that incident. However, Lomax did make a mention through our non-emergency line 311 that a vehicle had been following him around in multiple situations, if I do recall correct.
Do we have a reason to check Mr. Adams' vehicles and registration, the vehicles that he has registered in his name?
Something like that. I believe we'd have to get a subpoena from a judge to be able to access those from the valet. But once we do get something like that, that is something we could do.
I think if Mr. Lomax, in Mr. Lomax's statement, he's talking about the vehicle that that was following him, and I think it would be good if we get more of a description out of Mr. Lomax of the vehicle, knowing the list of vehicles that are owned, any vehicles that are owned by Mr. Adams could be helpful in that regard. Let's see here. Okay, I think that was all of your involvement in the. Now, were you present at the interrogations of Mr. Adams and Mr. Lomax?
I was. I personally interviewed Mr. Adams, where Novoa took the lead on Mr. Lomax. Now, on Mr. Lomax, I wasn't privy to the entire interview, but I was there for, I believe, the ending portion of it.
Okay, and were you running body cam footage at that time?
I'd have to check. It's a high possibility that I was, but like I said, if you can also reference that incident in the email, I'll be able to check for. I'll be able to check once I do get off duty today.
And this this would have been on the 8th of July. Though I'm a little puzzled still by the time that the interview occur after the shooting of Mr. Adams. This would have been the last incident where Mr. Adams and where Mr. Lomax allegedly shot Mr. Adams, and he confessed to having done so. We have the texts and everything from Trooper Novoa.
Yeah. So essentially, the sequence of events occurred as the first shootings at the lower pillbox area, as well as other areas throughout the city. That was the first occurrence. Following that one is the Clinton shooting, where Mr. Lomax was found in a down state. He was then transported over to Pillbox Upper Medical, where he was left there to get treated. Now, according to the report, he had somehow evaded medical personnel at the hospital and was actually, I guess in other words, broke out of the hospital.
Yeah, it was a statement from Trooper Parker that said that he was on his way back here to Mission Road to process the police hold on Mr. Lomax when they received word via 311 from the medical staff that Mr. Lomax had left the hospital under his own power. And both he and Trooper Novoa began a search for Mr. Lomax under, concern, first of all, for his health and safety, having lost a lot of blood in the previous shooting and stabbing that occurred on Clinton Avenue. Okay, so let me just take a quick look here at the Bernie Lomax case. So you guys questioned him basically after that final incident happened, and
yeah, sorry, I guess I didn't continue on. So Bernie broke out of the hospital. Then the shooting at Elgin and Vespucci happened. Once we had both of them in custody, we brought them down to Mission Row, and they were questioned and interviewed down in the holding cell below us.
All right. Okay, perfect. I think that that filled in several of the gaps that I had in my timeline. It was particularly, I really wasn't. It wasn't clear from the police report on when you spoke to or when they were interviewed about what happened with each other. So I can fill that into my timeline. I think there's. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to pull much in the way of of evidence as it relates to the shootings that occurred in and around town. That one seems to be a pretty difficult one unless we get really lucky on a witness spotting the vehicles. There was a witness on scene, but no one knows who that particular person was. But I do think we've got some solid cases here, though.
Yeah, and if you look in those reports that Miss Novoa put together, you'll actually see on them that during the questioning of both individuals, she has indicated on there what line of verbiage resulted in a confession. So it should be pretty easy for you to actually note those.
I've got I see them there in the report. I also I plan to speak with each one of the suspects being detained about the their involvement as a victim of the other person. So we could get that. There might be a little bit extra we get to kind of close the loopholes on anything there. I feel like I've got a real good picture of what happened on the Innocence and Elgin shooting for sure. So I don't think there's any way to back that out. I even investigated another call that was made in the area that was brought to my attention, and spoke with a witness that was at that particular call just to make sure that Mr. Lomax was not, in fact, present for that other incident when he was spotted leaving the Elgin Avenue area. Okay. Anything else that you have on that particular those particular cases?
No, not anything outside that's in the report. Like I said, for some of the information you are looking for, Trooper Nouveau will be the individual you're going to want to talk to, especially when it pertains to Mr. Lomax, because they were, I guess there was some sort of line of trust between the two, so he did. He did give a lot of that information over to Miss Nouveau.
Now, is Trooper Nouveau on duty today?